Welcome back to the non-dual lectionary. For this week, this is for the third Sunday after Epiphany, year C, and the gospel lesson this week is actually the first part. Next week picks up on the second part. Uh, so they're linked in some ways, but I'm still going to cover them separately. Uh, so our gospel lesson for this week on the lectionary, again, year C, third Sunday after Epiphany, is Luke chapter 4, verses 14 to 21. I will read it and then we'll talk about it. The beginning of the Galilean ministry, starting with verse 14, then Jesus, in the power of the Spirit, returned to Galilee, and a report about him spread through all the surrounding region. He began to teach in their synagogues and was praised by everyone. And then the next heading is the rejection of Jesus at Nazareth, and this part actually doesn't cover that. The rejection part doesn't show up until next week's lesson. But starting with verse 16, then, when he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, as was his custom. He stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given to him. He unrolled the scroll and found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set free those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of all in the synagogue were fixed on him. Then he began to say to them, "Today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." And this is one of those, I think there's something really interesting here, but I do think it takes a little teasing out. First thing I just want to point out, it's not really, but he began to teach in their synagogues and was praised by everyone. And they don't actually stop and tell us what the teaching was. I think that's interesting. And at the same time, what we get next, I think, is part of the teaching. And it, if we look at this in the normal sort of, he's talking about himself as a separate person and as a separate little ego self, and what he's going to do externally in the world. It seems, it's a prophecy about him being the person that does all of these things in the world. But I think there's a key right at the end here that sends us back and gives us a whole new perspective. And again, fits right in with that non-dual recognition, um, that view from our true nature instead of from our small self. And it's right at the end there. Today, the scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing. And the first thing there, I think, is it hasn't been fulfilled in your hearing. None of those things have happened. Um, but who's the you that's the hearing here? I think that's the key that unlocks the whole thing. If we think about this as the you that's hearing is just your separate self, your small self, your ego self, then it's the normal, external. This is about who Jesus is and what he's going to do. But one of the things in a lot of teachings, a lot of wisdom teachings, a lot of non-dual teachings, is that things that sound like a should or things that sound like a this is who you are, right? We're speaking to that. Those teachings are speaking to our true nature, the part. And I don't even like to say part, our self that already knows that that is true. It's again, it's evoking, it's calling that out as opposed to asking for the small self to do something different. That's how we all, I'm going to say all. That's how all of us hear it at first, right? Is, oh, it's a message of something I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to shift my mind. I'm supposed to do something different. But it's been fulfilled in your hearing. The you here, I think, is speaking to the true nature. And what is that then as we look back? If you have heard this, right? If your true nature has really heard this, then the me here, right, is also the one who's speaking to the same thing. It's a resonance. It's the me and you, the Buddha and the divine in me resonating and speaking to the divine in you, the namaste. And so then that lesson from Isaiah, right? He's anointed me to bring good news to the poor, proclaim release to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, set free those who are oppressed. Yeah, those are all things that could happen out in the world. But they're also, again, from that non-dual recognition, speaking to something more fundamental than the apparent lack that's already there, right? So poverty, the apparent lack of wealth and resources, captive, the apparent lack of freedom, blind, the apparent lack of sight, oppressed, the apparent lack of freedom again. And the non-dual recognition, right? The recognition of our true nature says that all of those apparent lacks, there's something deeper than all of that. There's something deeper inside that, and again, inside isn't even quite the right word, right? But there's something that in our true nature, all of those apparent lacks disappear. The question of like, is this better than that? The question disappears when when we sit, when we live, when we see from that true nature. So then the scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing. If you can hear that, it's been fulfilled right now. It's not something that has to be done later. It's not a message of you need to see that I'm the good separate self person out here and other believe in that or not believe in that. It's fulfilled in your hearing if you recognize now that that is what is. And what is what is for Jesus, and it also is what is for you and I, again in our true nature.